What is so interesting to you about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies? Like, why, there's so much stuff that you do that I find fascinating. Everything from what I would consider like traditional research just around human decision making, behavioral economics, and that stuff, to even more of the like what some people would consider the more controversial stuff and viewing, hey, we live in this mad, crazy, insane world. But cryptocurrencies, like, why is that the thing that now you're so interested in?
I can sort of look at the crypto space wearing a number of different hats. So one hat is just as a behavioral scientist, what's going on with crypto? It's an exciting movement. It's also psychologically really confusing, and there's a lot of aspects of crypto that are extremely counterintuitive. Like, how do people think about value and networks and security and decentralization, and how do these protocols actually work? What's the kind of underlying game theory of how do you get, consensus mechanisms that are resistant to attack? So there's kind of the like psychology of how people understand crypto. Another hat is just as an individual investor, how do you face the very, very steep learning curve of trying to understand what the hell is this industry? How does it function? How do you distinguish, a good solid project from a shitty meme coin? How do you kind of work your way into the industry without, getting wrecked and losing everything? And then a third hat is just at a kind of social and political and cultural level. What's going on with crypto? How does it challenge traditional finance and vested interests? And what are the full kind of cultural and political implications? So all three of those are absolutely fascinating to me. And I love getting kind of red pilled by new, human phenomena. And I think crypto, no matter what you think of it as a movement or as a sort of investment domain, is absolutely fascinating if you have any interest in human nature or psychology.
So let's start with the third one first. This idea of challenging the establishment, challenging the incumbents, whether they're just financial firms or something much bigger. How do you think about evaluating the current new technologies that we have versus that like old legacy world?
The funny thing about the old legacy world, the way that fiat currency works, the way that banking works, is it's really hard to understand the legacy world until you understand crypto, right? Because you just take the legacy finance world for granted. You just kind of think that's the state of nature. Obviously, that's how capitalism and finance and money and pensions should work. Because there's no contrast, there's no alternative. Once you get a serious contrast, a sort of alternative system, then you can start to kind of pick apart the legacy system and understand, oh my gosh, like here's banking, here's why Wall Street and banking have certain kinds of lobbying, here's why they have certain kinds of political influence, and here's why it's oppressive and kind of constraining to people. So I kind of felt like crypto blew my mind about that because, I've like worked in an economics department for 4 years at University College London, surrounded by people who do behavioral economics work. And in a way, they kind of know less about the existing finance system than even kind of crypto newbies who've just read a little bit, like, the Bitcoin Standard or watched your show for, a few hours.
And so when you think about that maybe difference in education, is it because they are incentivized not to understand? So if you're sitting at an academic institution, whether you're sitting in an elected official position or in an appointed position, let's just call them kind of the academics and theorists, if you will, rather than the market participants. Is it you're disincentivized from learning? Is it you don't need to, so you're almost complacent? Or do you actually understand and you're better off not letting on the fact that you understand, because that would then, the game would be up, if you will?
I think it's mostly just you're surrounded by groupthink, you're surrounded by like-minded people who've all taken the same, 200 level macroeconomics courses that say, this is how money should work, this is how you should manipulate the money supply in order to deal with financial crises or promote growth or manage unemployment. And if you get, A's in macroeconomics and then you become like a finance person or a banker or an economist, you figure, well, I got the seal of approval from traditional econ. I must know what I'm talking about, and everybody around me thinks the same way. So stepping outside of that is very difficult because you're subject to immense professional pressures to kind of conform to that worldview. If you start talking about alternatives, everybody thinks you're kind of crazy, and also you've got heavy professional disincentives not to make noise about that because, it'll limit your career options. For example, if you're an economist who wants to advise governments about things, you kind of have to buy into the IMF fiat worldview about these things.
When you start to look at the behavioral economics of all of this, there's a lot of talk of game theory, right? Of kind of Bitcoin is inevitable. People have to adopt it at some point. And I think when people were saying that in 2010, 2011, 2012, that was like a pipe dream. And even the people that were involved then were like, yeah, I mean, we kind of believed it, but that was kind of crazy idea. Now it seems to be playing out. We've got individuals in, now we've got financial institutions. We're starting to see some public corporations. We have one nation state that's made it legal tender and really started to kind of embrace it. Is this using history as like a guide? Of course this was going to happen. Of course this is like the natural progression of something. Or are you surprised by this given kind of the mental models and experience that you have in some of these disciplines?
The game theory here is really complicated. So there's kind of one level of game theory, which is at the protocol or consensus level of how do you keep any given protocol like, Bitcoin or Ethereum or Cardano resistant to specific kinds of attacks. But then there's a larger kind of political game theory, which is how do you get enough buy-in from existing power structures, including regulators and nation states, so that they can't mess it up? So that, for example, enough politicians are personally invested in Bitcoin or have family wealth in Bitcoin that they no longer have the personal or political incentives to attack it really hard. As far as I can tell, there's a lot more game theory applied to kind of how do we keep Bitcoin safe from a 51% attack than there is game theory applied to that larger political issue. Or the issue of the sort of intergenerational thing of how do you convince rich boomers to actually invest in crypto rather than just young people who don't have any money or middle-aged guys like me who have a little bit of money and a little bit of understanding. So when you're doing game theory and you're thinking, how do we make this crypto protocol resistant to attack? The attacks can come from many, many levels. It could be political regulation. It could be a kind of cultural level attack. Like if crypto somehow got associated with certain taboo beliefs, right? If it was smeared by association with certain unacceptable cultural associations, then nobody would want to own crypto because the social costs would be too high. So when you're thinking about the game theory, you have to be very inclusive in thinking, what are all the possible vectors of attack that could mess up the crypto industry?